Shalom and greetings from Jerusalem. My name is Joan Lippis, or hashtag Joni in Jerusalem, welcoming you to Lunchtime Prayer for Israel. Lunchtime Prayer for Israel is part of the Novea Ministries family, dedicated to filling the earth with the knowledge of God's glory. Well, as you know, we're in a series called End Times, and this week we are talking about lawlessness, because lawlessness, according to the prophecy of Matthew, lawlessness will abound. And we're seeing that today. And because of that, the love of many will grow cold. So we're looking this week at the various aspects of the law. We've recognized that God is the law giver and that the law is good, because God's law is full of law, instructions, grace, and truth and mercy, because God doesn't change. He is all of those things. He's holy, He's just, He's loving, He's God. Well, today we're going to be talking about the privileges and responsibilities of the law. Bet you never thought about that. Well, let's consider. Every good relationship, emphasis good, is based on an agreement, a covenant, if you will, between the parties. Now, the agreement should, emphasis should, address the desires and expectations of all the parties, and most important, their level of commitment. Now, where people get confused is they think they're making a commitment to the person with whom they're making a covenant, but that can change really easily depending on feelings. But we're making the commitment to the covenant, because when we make the commitment to the covenant, we will stick with it regardless of our feelings. So in other words, the covenant specifies the privileges and responsibilities of all the parties involved. So I suggest that we can consider law to be the parameters, the boundaries of covenant. Now, covenants can be made between individuals, certainly that's your marriage, citizens of a nation, and most importantly, between God and His creation. Now, when God created Adam and Eve, He gave them the privilege of an intimate relationship between each other and with Him. And that privilege also came with responsibilities. And we see this in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 30, and chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Very succinctly, they were to fill the earth and subdue it, having dominion over every living thing. That's a huge. Do we want to call that a privilege, or do we want to call that a responsibility? It's both. And then they had this responsibility. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Very clear, wasn't it? Then God gave a covenant with Israel, the Mosaic Law, which we talked about yesterday, because that covenant had to instruct them how to live their lives, because now they were called as His witness to the Gentiles. What did that look like? That was a huge privilege with a lot of responsibilities. They also were a free nation, but they were living among Gentile nations with whom they were not to associate. They were to be unlike the other nations, although they were living in the midst of them. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Now, God's commandments were not meant to restrict, but to enable the people to live the lives for which He designed them. Now, the entire Mosaic Law was summarized by one instruction, and we see this in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, which Yeshua said the whole law is wrapped up in that one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your might. And then, of course, Yeshua went on, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the Shema. Shema is that first word, hear. And it doesn't mean just listen. It means hear with understanding and obey. Well, God's law also extends beyond the moral, civil, and spiritual privileges and responsibilities of His people, both Israel and the church. He also designed creation with responsibilities. Do you ever think of that? The creation has responsibilities? So let's go back to Psalm 19, but this time verses 1 through 4. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Now, why do I say that that's a responsibility? Well, we're going to see that later on in another day when we look at Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32. Now, these natural laws include laws of life. Well, what do I mean by laws of life? Well, life, procreation. There's a law which until recently there was no question about it. Procreation is only by the fertilization of an egg of the woman, fertilized by the seed of a man. And then the end result is a multiplication of like kind. Now, why do I say that things are changing? It's part of lawlessness, because what we are seeing is the most horrific thing called transhumanism, where, well, all sorts of weird things are going on, and actually they are so weird, I am debating whether or not I want to make them part of this series. It's so horrific, but if you want to know more about it, just look up transhumanism. Well, there are also laws of gravity, of chemistry, of planetary motion, physics, mathematics, logic, economics, and uniformity. I didn't even know that was a law. Well, we want to pray for Israel to seek God's law, not through the Mosaic covenant, but through the new covenant. For then they will recognize, as they look at both, that the new covenant is so much better. So much better. Amen? Of course, amen. Now don't forget to subscribe or make a comment on the video, or better yet, send me an email. I would love to hear from you. So with that, I say Lehitraot, Shalom from Jerusalem.